Hello, everyone.
Welcome to the Queers of Time podcast.
I'm Matt.
I'm James.
I'm Kenny.
And I'm Kat.
And this is a podcast to talk about all the gay stuff in the Wheel of Time.
Because we're gay and we like the Wheel of Time.
Thank you to Lurks as our feral venerator of Soirean because she's our sugar mommy. And thank you to Travis who does transcriptions and to Kevin who does other things here, both physically, emotionally, and...
No.
Don't do it.
Okay, I won't do it.
Don't do it.
I won't do it.
No.
Thank you to all the people that make this happen, but especially Sugar Mommy.
I will not call Lux sugar mommy, okay?
You don't have to. I will.
Okay.
Mommy, thank you. Mommy.
Okay. After over a year of talking about how gay the Wheel of Time is, or isn't, we felt it was time to talk about actually queer fantasy. So we started looking at contemporary fantasy. And then we realized that there was some queer fantasy that deserved mention. And, then Matt sort of just decided that we're going to learn about the entire history of queer fantasy. So buckle up, buckaroos. We're going to learn you some gay fantasy shit in this special 2-part episode.
Yay!
Yay.
I'm so excited for this episode.
Yay!
You know, I was thinking we should start doing the Trixie and Katya thing where they're like, hey, I'm your mom's used cum rag, James.
What? No.
No. Oh my god, I get vetoed so quickly.
Yeah,
No.
You say the wildest things, and you're like, I can't understand why I'm being vetoed. It's
a hate crime. It is a hate crime is in progress.
the highest form of homophobia. It's happening right now.
Is the hate crime us not letting you talk about it, or is the hate crime you making us listen to it? Because...
there's a little bit of both.
I mean...
Yeah. Column A, column B.
Tomato, potato.
Yes. But anyways, yes. So this episode will be a 2-part episode. The first part is going to be me talking about the history of queer fantasy, and my co-hosts hopefully inserting their thoughts and reactions here and there, because there's some really wild shit in the annals of...
I'll insert some stuff. Oh, in some annals? Wow. We're going to insert into the annals?
There's some really weird shit in the annals of queer fantasy history.
I bet there are.
In part 2, Cat, naughty.
Well, okay. I say there's going to be inserting into queer annals.
I just filter it out because you're just gay trash. Cat has some standards.
That's
I don't
true.
think you know Kat very well.
Well...
Listen, James.
You have an image to maintain?
Oh, I'm surprised that you say listen James and not listen Matt.
I'm the one defending Cat. Anyways, so part 2 is going to be us talking about contemporary queer fantasy. But before I start, there's probably some housekeeping things. We all have to agree on the definitions of stuff, so we're all on the same page. So I'm going to define historical, modern, and contemporary. So historical is pretty self-explanatory. It was written a long-ass time ago. They all been dead for years. Not only are they dead, their bones is probably dust by now. So that's historical fiction. And modern typically means the 20th century, especially after the modernist movement, which you might recognize writers like Virginia Woolf and James Joyce and Hemingway. And that goes into what I would say the early 2000s, and then it becomes contemporary, because contemporary is mostly people who are still alive. So that's how I define fantasy and or just literature in general. And the second thing, I thought I tweeted about this yesterday, but I didn't. So what do The Lord of the Rings and Stonewall have to do with this timeline in queer fantasy? They actually...
Oh, I thought you were going to say, what do they have in common? And I'm like, Saruman threw the first brick at Stonewall.
Okay, I'm pretty sure Sam threw the first brick at Stonewall. Thank you.
Saruman became the many color. Yeah, I'm Saruman of many colors. He was a rainbow flag.
Yeah, 'twas Saruman.
Okay. I thought his name was Sharky.
What?
Yes, no, Sharky, like when he goes to the Shire?
Yeah, when he goes to the Shire.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe Saruman did throw the first brick at Stonewall.
Episode title?
Yeah, I was like, okay, maybe, not mine, it's maybe Saruman did throw the first brick at Stonewall.
Yeah. I think that's the title.
That's good.
But Stonewall and the Lord of the Rings both marked a huge shift in queer history and in fantasy, because before the Lord of the Rings, fantasy was pretty different. Like, we didn't have the concept like we do of the modern times. So when I talk about historical fantasy, we're going to have to like sort of expand what we think of as fantasy, because it's not going to be like the adventure to the mountain and throwing the ring and having the aged Instagram gay follow the ring into the mountain. Like, that's not how it goes. And as far as Stonewall, that basically, as our listeners should know, if you're a good little gay and know your history, that's where the modern queer rights movement started, and it's also where we got a lot of our modern lingo from. Like, LGBT as an acronym didn't really take off until like the late 80s. So to really appreciate and to find and appreciate queer, trans, historical literature, you need to be able to search and interpret outside of that modern lens and modern terms, because while the concepts have always existed, the terms did not. And this goes for fantasy as well. And I just also wanted to say that this episode is basically a spite episode, because whenever I see people like, oh, this is so woke, like, you didn't have gay stuff in fantasy like 20 years ago. I'm like, not only did we have gay stuff in fantasy 20 years ago, we had it like 200, 300 years ago. So you can just shut the fuck up with that. James, you got something to say?
I always have something to say, but not today.
Oh, spicy.
Not right now.
If you don't have something to say right now, then that means you don't always have something to say. Be consistent.
Okay, you semantic piece of shit.
Look, I went to law school. I will semantify everything. Anyways, so I'm going to basically read y'all or talk about some examples.
Oh, okay. I'm like, you're going to read us? You just tried to read me.
James, you read yourself every time you open your mouth. I don't need any effort from my part.
Because reading is what?
Fundamental.
Fundamental. Thank you.
So, I would say historical fantasy is pre-Lord of the Rings. And there's lots of cool stuff if you just know where to look, and if you think beyond the terms of, oh, here's a story about a gay person dealing with what it's like to be gay or trans, and just sort of go with the flow. Like in Margaret Cavendish's The Blazing World from 1666. It's also Mary Shelley gets a lot of credit for like starting science fiction, but actually Margaret Cavendish's 1666 novel The Blazing World is sort of proto-science fiction. And also I should say that for the purposes of this, I'm just going to consider everything fantasy, like fantasy, science fiction. It's all under the umbrella of speculative fiction, which also includes supernatural horror. So just to get that out of the way, it all counts. The Blazing World was, I guess, the first proto-science fiction novel, and it was also the first utopian novel by a woman. And it's basically about a magical kingdom in Antarctica run by an empress and her platonic lover, a duchess. And they have adventures all over the world. And at one point, they astrally project into the mind of a man. And there is a platonic threesome, whatever that means. Or they were a platonic threesome is, I think, the term from the book.
How?
Why?
Why? How?
Okay, so my first question is, could threesome have another meaning?
I mean, probably. Okay, yes, threesome back then didn't mean like they all having sex, but like the term that they did use for the Duchess and the Empress is platonic lovers, which like that's even with 1666 lingo, that is pretty.
It is a little queer.
Lovers has always had that connotation.
Yes.
It's one of those constants. So, like, I don't know what they mean by platonic lovers, but, I mean, maybe...
No, I was just reading your synopsis here where it's like, there's an astral projection threesome. And that kind of... Like, what were they doing? What were they doing with the threesome?
What's happening?
They were mingling their souls together.
Oh.
They were
I mean, that's a really
Wow.
fruity way of putting it, but okay.
Extremely fruity way of putting it. My goodness.
I mingle my soul quite a bit then.
I'm sure you have. But yeah, basically it's a novel by a woman, and she basically constructed this whole ass fantasy world where the patriarchy wasn't dominant. And this was back in 1666. So any of our listeners who get into arguments with like book cloaks or assholes who say that books are woke now, you can just point back to 1666, the devil's year, by the way. Well, I guess that would be 666. Anyways.
The Devil's Anniversary.
The Devil's 1,000-year anniversary. The Blazing World. The next one is a really fun one called Vathek by William Beckford, who was known as a...
What'd you call me?
Vathek.
Just sounds like a slur.
It does. William Beckford he's described on Wikipedia as a notorious homosexual, or he was known to be notoriously homosexual, and that is
Gay.
Is there any other way to be?
exactly
Yeah.
to be remembered as notoriously homosexual is just like
The dream.
goals.
That's how I hope to be remembered.
And you know what? I think you will.
Exactly.
I think you're going to achieve that, James.
Notoriously homosexual. That's what goes on my tombstone that I don't have.
I think so. Yeah.
We can arrange that. So
For my murder or for my tombstone?
That's what I was going to ask.
yes.
Wait, which part are we arranging here?
Yes.
I mean, technically, we can buy the tombstone way before you die.
This is true.
That's true. Oh, that would be cool.
To buy a tombstone.
What if I just have a tombstone in like my living room and it just says James Stark, notoriously homosexual,
I love that.
You can just keep it around.
That would be a vibe.
1990 to...
Don't put a date.
Don't put the date.
No, you don't put the date. You leave that part blank.
Don't speak that into the universe. You don't even think about the date.
No.
Just let it be.
It's gonna probably be 2069.
Oh, that would be nice.
That would be nice. And then everyone at the funeral will just gather around and say,
Go like nice.
nice.
Just one word.
Nice.
Okay, so Vathek.
Oh.
Oh,
Sorry. No, I'm sorry. I'm reading ahead. I shouldn't read ahead.
You can't. You're going to get distracted.
The reactions to some of this shit is part of the thing. So Vathek is a Gothic novel. It's one of the first Gothic novels. It was from 1782. So Vathek is a corrupt prince who becomes jealous of a woman, and he wants to marry her, except she's already engaged to her effeminate cousin, who I'm going to call Gary because his real name is like four syllables, and I'm just not going to do that. It's like Gulchin Rose or something. It's
Wow.
an ugly, it's a bad name.
Wow.
Gary
Gulchin
Rose. Hoofa doofa.
It's like Gulchenrouz. It's ugly. And I don't want to say that word, and I don't want to transcript people to have to deal with that. So we'll call him Gary. Gary the Twink.
Gulchenrouz?
Gary the Twink.
In the novel, in this 1782 novel, Gary is described as being too supple, too pure, and too beautiful for this world, and he has no interest in his female cousin. He has no interest in marrying her. He wants to be pretty and frolic naked in the forest. Like this, he's basically a twink. And this is the best part. Vathek the prince tries to sacrifice Gary in a blood ritual, but a genie who is besmitten by how beautiful Gary is, whisks him up in his muscular arms and takes him to a cloudy paradise where he gets to frolic with other naked youths for eternity without dying, while everybody else in the novel ends up suffering and going to hell.
Oh my god.
This is the opposite of twink erasure.
It is.
Erasure, I'm sorry.
The description of Gary as too pure, supple, and beautiful for the world. I'm sorry, but the first thing I thought was like, hey, that sounds like Galad.
I don't think he's as masculine as Galad.
Yeah, he sounds very twinky.
Yeah.
Yes, but like too beautiful for this world was very much a Galad thing.
True. That's very true. It's reading this novel, I was like, this author's got to be a homo, and I googled, and sure enough, like he was a homo.
Notoriously homosexual.
Yes.
He was notoriously homosexual. Actually, William Beckford got in trouble because he seduced his younger cousin, who was like, no, he was seduced by his younger cousin when his younger cousin was like 14 or 15. And so then, like, I go to his cousin. These were like minor nobles in England. So like his cousin has a Wikipedia page, and apparently he was also notoriously homosexual and seduced many older noblemen, and like just
Good for him.
seduced tons of men. This is in the 1700s, so
He had some game.
Yeah, I mean, listen, these people, they were living their life. And good for them.
they were living their best queer lives.
Living their best queer lives. I keep forgetting that marrying and fucking your cousins was like chill at this time.
Yeah.
And so every time you say cousin, I'm like, oh, that's right. Okay.
No, not Arkansas.
I see.
I mean, when you look at like kings and queens in pretty much every European country, it's like, oh, cousin.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Carmilla.
I know that one.
Yes, if any historical. Okay, there's the next two are books that I think most of our listeners will have heard of. Our Sapphics will probably have heard of Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu, an 1872 novel. Not only is it very sapphic, but it also is the first modern vampire novel. It predates Dracula by like 20, 30 years. It's really short. I recommend it. It's a fun novel. It's a much faster plot, and whereas Dracula has some gay subtext, Carmilla is just straight up sapphic. It can also be read as a tale of forbidden love, since Carmilla and Laura, the human protagonist, are mutually drawn to each other. Like back then, a lot of morality literature was like, they'll seduce you, and like the predatory lesbian was a very prominent idea back then, and Carmilla sort of flipped that on its head by having like both the human and the vampire attracted to each other. But Carmilla still wanted to like, eat her lover, which is not in the fun way, not in the good way.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
No, not eat her out, just like eat her and end her life.
Okay. So ending her life is the part that I was looking for.
Yes.
Because if she just wants to take a little sip, that's fine.
Yes. So, and also, it's Victorian literature, and the undead monster has to die. It's just how this was post Frankenstein era.
For Carmilla, I think a lot of the Sapphic community will know about that, not just because of the novel, but also because there was a web series that was made maybe 10 years ago.
Oh my God.
Gosh.
Jesus Christ.
At least 10 years, something like that.
Oh my God.
And it was basically a Carmilla and Laura in university kind of alternative universe. A very low budget web series, but at a time where there was very, very little queer representation in media. And that shit was dope.
Yeah, it was like, I never watched Camilla. I never watched it really. It just didn't, I don't know, just never really quite clicked with me. But I remember when it was on, like when it was airing, everyone was talking about this. It was unbelievably popular. And it looked cute. It looked really like,
It was cute. It was a low budget thing that didn't take itself too seriously. And
Oh, that's us.
I mean, yes.
Yay.
Basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope somebody would mention the web series, because I know it exists, but I don't know anything about it other than like
It exists.
it exists and it uses Carmilla as like source material. But that's really cool, and it also just shows like how when some people like dismiss really old novels as like, oh, it's just old. Everything is old, dusty white man. Well, no, actually, it's not. Even though Carmilla was written by an old white man.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm like, I've been adding all of these to my Barnes and Noble cart, and I'm like, oh, you said Sheridan Le Fanu? I assumed like Sheridan was a woman's first name. No, it's Joseph.
Yeah, no, Sheridan or Sherry, as I call him. He was a good one. I think he was Irish, which back then was like,
Back then it was dangerous.
Yes.
Yes.
Edgy.
Anyways,
Queer is the new Irish.
Oh God. Speaking of Irish, we have another Irish person on the next, and it's what the gays will probably know, and that is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, 1890. We all know the story. Dorian is a saucy twink socialite, and he commissions a painting by his bro named Basil, who also has a very gay boner for Dorian. We don't know if the attraction is mutual, but we do know that the novel that was published and the novel that was pretty much mostly widely available until just a few years ago was the redacted version. Not that the uncensored version is like porn, because it's not, but like the unredacted version, Basil is like very obviously gay and in love with Dorian in a sexual romantic way, and not just like, oh, I admire this person, which is what a lot of Victorians sort of couch their language in. And as we know, Oscar Wilde was also he was
Fairy.
He was a fairy. He was an Irish fairy, and
He did not have working wrists.
he did not have working wrists, and he was also
Not a one.
he was put on trial for obscenity, and it ended up ruining his life. So we don't need to talk too much about the picture of Dorian Gray because it's just so much. It's still in the cultural zeitgeist. The one that I have most recently read, and which is super exciting, is by Virginia Woolf. It's called Orlando, and it is a book that she wrote dedicated to her lesbian lover, Vita Sackville West. And
That is the gayest name.
Yeah.
Vita Sackville West. Vita Sackville West.
It's still pretty gay, I think.
It's still pretty gay, yeah.
It's still pretty, yeah.
So not only is the novel dedicated, the novel is literally dedicated to her, like in the front page. And the novel has photographs of the character Orlando, both as a man and as a woman. And Virginia Woolf had Vita pose for all those pictures. Like,
Sapphics are ridiculous. Oh my god. I love it. I love it.
this is almost 100 years. It's a 95-year-old book. But Orlando is basically about a boy who is a noble, and he grows into a man, as most or many boys do, and he becomes dissatisfied with life. And so one night,
As many boys do.
a bunch of angels, I think their names are like Purity, Modesty, and Chastity, they dance around him, and he wakes up as a woman. And then he proceeds to like live for like 300 years as a 36-year-old woman, going by she, her pronouns. And it's an amazingly funny novel when you just think like 100 years ago that a woman whole ass wrote a book about her lover, and dedicated it to her and used her as the model for the illustrations. And there was also a quote that I think, like, I read it like a few days ago, and I think it's like really prescient for today, because like with all the quote unquote gender critical idiots out there, who were like, oh, this is a new thing that people are yada yada. Let me just read you this quote, and remember that this quote is 95 years old. The change seemed to have been accomplished painlessly and completely, and in such a way that Orlando herself showed no surprise at it. Many people, taking this into account and holding that such a change of sex is against nature, have been at great pains to prove, 1, that Orlando had always been a woman, or 2, that Orlando is at this moment a man. Let biologists and psychologists determine. It is enough for us to state the simple fact. Orlando was a man till the age of 30, when he became a woman, and has remained so ever since. Like, does that like not resonate with like some of the bullshit people are saying?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, it does.
And for 1928.
Yeah.
And from 1928,
That's crazy. Oh my god.
I love that.
That's so cool.
And sometimes, like, so I'm currently reading the novel, and a few times Virginia Woolf used they to describe Orlando, because when she describes Orlando in the past, she uses the he pronoun, and when she describes Orlando after the magical transformation, she uses she, but in some paragraphs she like switches back and forth really quick, so she just uses like they. So I think that's just like amazing that this existed. So, and again, like James said, the Sapphics are just wild.
Yeah.
That was Kat that said that?
That's me.
Oh, that was Kat.
I said Sapphics are just ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm like, I know we sound exactly the same, and we are the same person.
Essentially.
I mean, just look at us.
My coffee hasn't kicked in yet, okay.
Listen, it's not you. Everyone, like, the transcript thinks that we're the same person.
Yes.
Yeah.
Frequently.
Which I don't get.
I mean, clearly, there are just so many similarities between me and James.
Yes.
Visually, I mean.
So I hope that I hope that our listeners and my co-hosts enjoy the historical portion of this, even though like words like transgender and gay weren't used at all, and like it's not fantasy the way that we think of modern fantasy. Like, this is queer fantasy.
Right.
And it's just amazing, like, how much of it there is. Well,
How much?
how much of it there is considering how much there could be, which is none. It's amazing that there is some like stuff
Right.
at all.
Yeah.
And also, this is just the stuff that like survived. Like, we don't know about the stuff that just did not make it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because so that's one thing regarding queer literature is that it's like the stories always exist, but are they allowed to be told?
Right, to be written down. And I mean, because you go back to like ancient Greece and stuff, and you have gay ass stories. So
Oh yeah, a lot of Greek mythology is
all that gay. Achilles and Patroclus.
yes, Apollo and his many male lovers and female lovers.
Apollo, that bi-icon.
The bi-icon himself.
The bicon.
The bicon.
Bicon, Apollo. So yeah, it's really cool to think about. And I'm sure James is going to be very happy with this because I know that this is one of James's favorite authors, and also mine. But I consider.
Let me go get out my Ursula K. Le Guin shelf.
Oh, yay! I was hoping we were going to talk about Miss Ursula today.
Yes. So the year 1969, giggity. In 1969, we had a more modern idea of fantasy. Tolkien had published The Lord of the Rings, and we have the idea of fantasy as a secondary world, adventures and epics and stuff like that. So we have modern fantasy down pat already. And then something called Stonewall happens. And Stonewall sort of marks the era of modern. Okay, so Stonewall, when you consider it in light of The Lord of the Rings, it marks the point in culture where queerness and fantasy, both as modern concepts, start to develop. And that's where Ursula K. Le Guin comes in. She actually, Miss Ursula, yes, The Left Hand of Darkness. Miss Ursula's Left Hand of Darkness, which is a seminal sci-fi work, was actually published 3 months before Stonewall. So 1969 was just a year of lots of shit happening.
There was a lot of queer things happening in 1969, which is like, it's crazy when the universe just sort of like, everything just kind of converges and things just happen in bursts all at the same time. And
yeah. I mean, I will say, like, so the very first page of, I hope you don't mind me interjecting because I do love this novel a little bit. The very first page where, like, they show you a little preview of, like, what to expect in the novel. It says, our entire pattern of sociosexual interaction is non-existent here. The Gethenians do not see one another as men or women. This is almost impossible for our imaginations to accept. After all, what is the first question we ask about a newborn baby? And yet you cannot think of a Genethian as it. They are not neuters. They are potentials. During each sexual cycle, they may develop in either direction for the duration of that cycle. No physiological habit is established, and the mother of several children may be the father of several more. There is no division of humanity into strong and weak halves, protective, protected. One is respected and judged only as a human being. You cannot cast a Genethian into the role of man or woman while adopting towards him a corresponding role dependent upon your expectations of the intersections between persons of the same or opposite sex. It is an appalling experience for a Terran.
And this was published in March of 1969. And so, yeah, I mean, James basically like summarized what I was going to say about the left hand of darkness, which is great because, I want other people to talk.
No, yeah. I picked this copy up in like a used bookstore, and it has a whole bunch of like underlines and writings. This is, I believe, like this one was published this one was 1976. And I'm pretty sure like one person owned it before then because it just has a bunch of underlines and notes and highlights and stuff. And yeah, it's very sweet. I read this and I was like teary-eyed, like looking at some of the notes in here because I'm like, oh, someone was clearly going through a journey.
Aww. I loved used books for that reason. They're great for that reason. Yeah.
I love The Left Hand of Darkness because it really like, it's not quite the same as agender, which is what I am, but it is somewhat... It erases the gender lines, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. And I think a lot of people have Ursula K. Le Guin to thank for
everything.
For everything, yes. she is still not appreciated as much as I think she should be. She is appreciated in
Nope.
the sci-fi heavy community. Like, she is highly respected in the sci-fi Reddit of America. Like, in the science fiction and the fantasy writing community, she's a legend, but I think she should be a legend,
Period.
like a household name.
Yeah.
Also, her poetry is phenomenal.
Oh, incredible.
I hate poetry. I hate it. But Ursula K. Le Guin, like, with a few simple lines, just, like, makes me weep and question my existence.
Yeah, she was brilliant. She was...
Oh my god, she's incredible. I miss her. I just got a little sad.
I know. So one of the themes that comes out in The Left Hand of Darkness is the idea of having sex with whomever, regardless of sex. And that's really a feature that marked post-Stonewall fantasy literature, because if I was to summarize modern queer literature, it would be everybody having sex with everybody else, and casual bisexuality. There was really an So with the historical queer fantasy, I was looking very intently for these things, and basically what I have is what we have as far as queer fantasy or fantasy adjacent stuff. But as amazing as queer representation is today, and it is amazing, we're going to talk about the next episode, it's kind of also bonkers to think of what an explosion there was of queer fantasy and science fiction even as early as 1969, because the list of modern queer fantasy that I'm going through now is like the tip of the iceberg. Like, there's so much that we just don't have time to talk about in post-Stonewall queer fantasy. But the next one is if we have heard of a little tiny movie called 2001: A Space Odyssey by Kubrick. It was also a novel by Arthur C. Clarke, who was gay, and he wrote casual bisexuality into a lot of his books, but because he wanted to be published, he didn't make it a huge feature. But the older he got, the more accepting society was generally, so the more he integrated these themes into his books. So his 1973 novel, for instance, Rendezvous with Rama, a major male character is briefly mentioned as being in a sexual relationship with another male character who's very minor in the book. And both of them are in a relationship with a woman who's back on Earth. Now, the relationship is pretty much mentioned like in passing, and the major character is like plays a pivotal part in the plot, but like his identity is not a thing that's just discussed. It's just casual bisexuality, which brings us back to Ursula K. Le Guin in her 1974 novel The Dispossessed, which is basically a novel about communism versus capitalism, individualism versus collectivism. It's a philosophical novel, and it might not hit a lot of sci-fi fantasy fans the way that they're looking for.
Yeah, I had a hard time with this one. I read the first one because it's a series of 5 novels, the Hainish novels.
Right.
Yeah, The Dispossessed is a deeply philosophical novel. Like, it's not just there for the plot. It's there to explore ideas. And like a lot of deeply philosophical novels, it does not answer. Like, Ursula K. Le Guin was not a capitalist by any means, but I don't think she was. I think it would be oversimplifying to say that she comes down on the side of communism. She explores the pitfalls and the virtues of different societies through 2 different planets. But what they both have in common is that on both of these planets, both of these societies, and The Dispossessed, pretty much everybody's bisexual. The main character has a relationship with a man that lasts several years. The main character's a male. So if you are okay with a very philosophical novel that is not heavy on plots, but heavy on character and theme, The Dispossessed is great. And then there's the only book that I'm going to talk about in this episode that's by a still living author, Swords Point by Ellen Kushner. Again, it is a casual bisexuality. It's also the first actual fantasy novel that I'm talking about here, because a lot of what you see in like the late 20th century with queerness is science fiction, because it's a very progressive genre in general. But Swords Point's really fun. It's a standalone novel. I call it Game of Thrones light. Actually, I don't think Swords Point is standalone. I think the story
No, it's a trilogy.
Yeah, I think the story itself is standalone, but like the world itself is a trilogy. Maybe. I don't know. Anyways, Swords Point is fantastic. I call it Game of Thrones light because it has a Game of Thrones like setting, but it's not grimdark. Basically, the novel is about Are we okay, James?
No, I was looking it up on Barnes & Noble, and the second book is called The Privilege of the Sword, and I'm like, fucking gay.
Oh, that's some gay shit.
Ellen Kushner is amazing. She's also great on Twitter. But actually, speaking of Game of Thrones, George R. R. Martin praised this novel, and it was basically everyone's bisexual. There are a few like gay characters, and I think there's a few mentions of straight characters, but most people are bisexual. And the story is about a bisexual nobleman and his twink lover. And basically, they're gay and do crimes. It's like be gay, do crimes.
I love it.
While being a nobleman.
One of my favorite.
Sounds great.
I just posted a picture in Discord of the cover of it. Which one of those is the twink?
The one.
They both look like twink.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure the one on the left is a woman.
It's possible. Also, what you got to understand back then is that fantasy covers, like...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Wild.
Some of them bear very little relationship to what's the content of the books. Like, not to talk about Miss Ursula again, but like, she was on the warpath so many times because they tried to whitewash Earthsea.
Oh my
yes.
God. Oh my God.
That is one of my favorite things.
Oh my God. Listen.
If you do not have the giant tome that is the Earthsea, all of it, in the very beginning, she is like, she trashes the adaptation.
Yep.
She trashes on the covers because this one's fully illustrated. And she, like, one of her instructions was, this is how I describe my characters. If you make them white, I will kill you.
Right.
She was all about that smoke. She was always ready for that smoke, always ready for it. I love it.
Yeah. Basically, like the version that James has and the Folio Society editions that they're putting out now are like the only versions that like really embrace like the racial diversity of the characters, because in both cases, so the Folio Society, A Wizard of Earthsea, they worked with her on the design, and when it sold well, and she passed away sadly, and so they're publishing the rest of her Earthsea cycle, and they're working with her son to ensure that her aesthetic and her vision in the art is what is there. And so the Folio Society books are also like represent the diversity of her world, and the version that James has, which is so big. Oh my God. Like, honestly, I don't know how a gay person could read that because the wrist strength required to hold that book.
So lesbian should be fine, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
We'll be okay. We're good, Camille. We're solid. We're solid.
Okay. So yeah, Swords Point by Ellen Kushner is great. There's a similar series by Lynn Flewelling called The Shadowrunners, and it takes the same premise and does pretty well with it. And then there's two more. There's The Dark Beyond the Stars by Frank M. Robinson from 1997. It's more casual bisexuality. There's an immortal spaceship guy who is constantly being given amnesia and gaslit into believing that he's woken up from a coma. And anyways, like, yeah, it's basically the story is about an entire ship, like a generation ship where like the ship is in space for hundreds and thousands of years. They have one immortal passenger, and they basically keep gaslighting him into thinking that he's not immortal.
Oh my God.
That
Jesus.
That is problematic.
It's so
No.
He gets to have sex though with lots of people.
So that makes it better.
It sounds like he gets sexually assaulted a lot.
I mean,
no, there's no sexual assault. I mean,
is it okay, so if you're gaslit, is it fully informed consent? No.
I mean, but so like he wakes up from a coma and he's convinced that he was just on a mission, and like he has like false memories of before his quote unquote accident. And then he lives out his life and then for like 20-30 years, and then they induce another coma and put him in a coma for a while. It's
Okay, again, do you not see the problem with this?
Okay, by the time he starts having lots of sex, it's his last coma. Like he's out of the coma he discovers the secret
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
and takes control of the ship, and then he has lots of sex.
Oh, good for him. Well, he deserves that. That's good for him.
And the last, because I really wanted to include as wide a variety of authors as possible, is Fledgling by Octavia Butler in 2005. Bisexual vampires, what more could you ask for? Octavia Butler was a literary genius. And while Fledgling has more sexuality as themes, you should also read Kindred. I think every person should read Kindred, especially every white person should read Kindred.
I will say, just for Kindred, lots of trigger warnings. And so...
Basically all of them.
With a lot of Octavia Butler, fantastic author. She writes some heavy shit. She writes some incredible stuff, but it's heavy. So be aware going into it. This should not, I don't think it should necessarily be a deterrent, but it's something you should absolutely be aware of because it's a lot.
The whole book is a trigger warning.
Oh, it's a gigantic trigger warning.
But it wouldn't be as powerful as it is if she
exactly
sugarcoated it.
Actually, so I have not read it, but apparently I have it in my bookshelf because I think my sisters may have given it for me as a gift at some point. So very trigger warning. I'm gonna keep wondering why my sister sent me that. Then I don't think she has read it, but
maybe she hasn't read it.
Yeah, she was gifted to me. I check it out.
Yeah,
she was like, "You like to read?
Read this."
Everyone likes to read in my family, so
yeah.
That's good. That's good.
Family of readers.
My God, literacy
in a whole family. Wow.
Oh my God, that's...
So I'm cutting it off at 2005 because now we're getting into the realm of contemporary fantasy. I mean, already we have one author who is alive from my last book, Ellen Kushner. Yeah, basically this is the fantasy that a lot of y'all are used to and the queer stories that a lot of y'all are used to, the contemporary stuff. And in contemporary queer fantasy, not only do we have queer characters, but the focus also shifts to sexual and gender identity as an integral part of that character. This gives rise to the idea of representation and having a queer character who, as part of their character arc, discovers or interrogates what it means to be queer and to possess that identity. This sort of storytelling became really popular in the late noughties and throughout the 2010s.
The noughties?
That's what you call the oddies.
The oddies?
Yeah, the oddies.
Oh.
I call them the naughties.
The naughties. Okay, I like that.
What's that supposed to mean for the French person?
The zeros.
The zeros. Yeah.
Zeros, yeah.
The 2000s, basically.
Yeah.
So the storytelling of like not only having a central queer character, but also having them interrogate what it means to be queer gave us this proliferation and embarrassment of queer riches. And now in the 2020s, we are moving sort of to I don't want to say a happy medium because both queer representation and interrogating the idea of queer identity is important, but so is important like diverse works that just have a queer person doing a story and not having to interrogate their identity. I think we need both of those because they're both crucial. It's crucial to have stories where queer and trans characters deal with what it means to have that identity, to grapple it, embrace it, and what it means for them in their society to have that identity. And we also need stories where different queer and trans characters exist and participate in horror or romance or fantasy or action or mystery without having to interrogate their queerness or their transness. Both are super important, and we're moving, I don't want to say to a golden era because I like to think that each new era is a new golden era. You know, we had historical fantasy, and then we moved into the modern era, which was its own golden era. And now we're moving into just like this explosion of like queer contemporary fantasy. So that's basically what we're going to talk about in the next episode, which is, you know, our favorite contemporary fantasy books, both ones that are super queer themed and ones where people can just be gay and do crimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's gonna be fun. I'm definitely gonna keep.
What did we all think?
Yeah, I was about to say, like, what do we think about that list of books that Matt said? I know that I haven't read any of those, which I know is bad of me. I have a few. Like, no, I have The Left Hand of Darkness among the big list of books that I have to read and that I currently have bought and then not read. But there's definitely a few others that I want to check out. So.
I was thinking, like, while we were doing this, because I was adding so many to my cart on Barnes & Noble, is just like, we should pick one of the really short ones and do, like, a little book club.
Oh,
Yeah, we should.
yeah, that's a good idea.
Carmilla is probably the best for that. Carmilla is very short.
Okay.
Yeah, I was looking at Carmilla,
Yeah.
because that's only 79 pages, and then Vathek is 141 pages,
Okay.
so...
The thing with Vathek, though,
Oh, no.
Vathek, I want to understand the twink paradise.
so with Vathek, it suffers from a lot of white male literature from the 1700s, which is what we call Orientalism.
Oh, no.
Oh!
So there's some
Oh,
outdated
no.
concepts about race and the quote-unquote exotic East. Orientalism was a very popular literary genre at the time in England.
Okay.
So if our readers read Vathek, just go into it knowing that
Well, then we can go with Carmilla.
we can go with Carmilla is fantastic. Carmilla's short. Yeah, we could do like a queer book club.
That would be fun.
We should do that on the server, yeah.
I'm into that.
Yeah, I'm like, it's 74 pages, so let's just
That's doable.
do it in like a week.
Yeah. Just knock it out in a week.
Should we wait for the episode to come out and then start that? So that if
Yeah.
any listener wants to join us?
And then if we do if we do Carmilla and it goes off very well, we could do The Left Hand of Darkness, which is much longer.
Yeah.
I'm into that.
But very, very good.
I am into that.
Yeah. And there's also some contemporary. There's one graphic novel that I would love. If we're going to do this, there's a graphic novel I'm going to talk about in the next episode that I think would be a really fun group read.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
I'm into it.
Queer Book Club.
Yeah.
Yay.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Anyway, what did we think about like the queerness of historical fantasy or speculative fiction? Because I don't know. When Matt talks a lot about books, I kind of just go, that's nice, dear. But to hear some of this described is very interesting. And I knew that you had to kind of like read between the lines and like figure out what people were meaning because you couldn't outright say like he was a cum slut. But it's interesting how you don't have to read so far between the lines as I thought you would. Because twink heaven, even if it's racist twink heaven, is interesting.
I mean, and this is only fantasy. Like I didn't. If I wanted to talk about diverse books in general or
Oh, yeah.
black fantasy, because I'm always going to talk about Pauline Hopkins' 1902 novel Of One Blood, first black woman to write and traditionally publish a fantasy novel. And then there's also E.M. Forster, who wrote a novel called Maurice. He wrote it in 1913 and 1914, and it's the first novel that we know of that portrays a gay relationship explicitly and gives its gay characters happy endings. But it wasn't published until 1973 because...
Homophobia today.
So, if our listeners respond well to this, I could also give a little Professor Matt lecture on just queer lit in general from the long ago times.
Yeah, so it's definitely something we can keep. I was going to say like while waiting for season 2, but no, we have a date for season 2. So
Yeah, we do.
We have a date.
between season 2 and season 3, we can come back to queer literature.
There you go.
I can talk about how in War and Peace, two characters make out while in drag.
Oh, really?
Oh.
Okay, well, that would require me to give a shit about War and Peace, and
We'd have to read War and Peace, though, and
I can't. I understand that you love the classics and that I am a lesser being, but I will never read War and Peace.
How long is that book?
War and Peace is famously like
so long.
longer than Sanderson.
So
Yeah.
long. And it's wordy. It's dense. It's a dense motherfucker.
Look,
Like,
it's okay. Like, not every book is for every person, and that is okay. And that's valid. That's okay. That being said, if you are the type that does enjoy classic lit, War and Peace is amazing, and 2 characters do make out while in drag.
Meanwhile, I'm reading his dark material because it's a level of English that I understand, and even then, sometimes I miss people that die. So.
Oh no!
War and Peace. Guess how many chapters it has?
Jesus Christ, that's a big one.
I don't know.
Several hundred.
Yeah.
Fuck.
What?
But the chapters it has several hundred chapters, but the chapters range from 1 to 5 pages for the most part.
Oh, I see.
I'm just saying, it's still 361 chapters.
How many pages in total?
1,296.
Yeah, depending on the page, depending on the size of the font, it can be 12 to 1,500 pages. It's a
thickum.
It is. So with the caveat that you don't have to feel pressure to enjoy it or to read it, it is more digestible than people think because the chapters are just very short. Like some chapters are just a page long. So like there are Reddit communities that do like a reading of War and Peace 1 chapter a day because it takes anywhere from like 5 to 15 minutes to read a chapter.
So it takes a year?
So they read it. Yeah, they read it in small doses over a year, and a lot of people find it rewarding.
I'd rather suck a dick a year. Suck a dick a day for a year.
Well...
You don't do that already?
No, I wish.
Gosh. Well, I could also talk about Proust's In Search of Lost Time, James, which is even longer than War and Peace, and it's explicitly gay.
All right, so thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Queers of Time podcast. We hope that you will tune in for the next episode where we talk about the contemporary queer fiction or queer fantasy. We each have some books that we are going to highlight. Thank you so much for listening. Join our Discord, give us money. We want more sugar mommies and sugar daddies. Discord, Twitter, cool, maybe book club sometime. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all for listening. This was Queers of Time, a Wheel of Time podcast. The music is Dance of the Witches by Julius H.